Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a trilogy review for First Law by Joe Abercrombie. The first chunk of this is going to be completely non-spoiler, even if you haven't read the first one. No big deal, I won't be giving away anything at all, and then at the end of the video I will talk some spoilers for the last one. I've done some spoilery chats for the first two, so I'm not going to go too in-depth with those, but I do have a lot of thoughts about the last one that I would love to chat about, spoiler-filled. This series is extremely character driven, and it follows basically the characters who are pulled along by the motivations and goals of individuals that have more power than them. In that way, it's a little bit different than a lot of other fantasy books, because a lot of times we follow the significant individuals. We follow the kings, the queens, or people that are directly under them, people involved somehow in important decision making. And when we first start off the story, we're pretty much not following anybody like that. We are following individuals who work for politicians, if you will, and they don't really like what they do. They don't really have a lot of motivations of their own. They don't have a ton of agency. So when you first start off in the first book, you're gonna find likely that it feels like it isn't particularly grounded. We don't feel like we have a set thing that we are trying to build toward. It just kind of feels like we're observing these characters aimlessly. As the story progresses, of course, things start to develop and things get more interesting. The characters become more fleshed out, and that's something that even right away from the beginning, the characters are already being shown in a way that I don't feel a lot of other authors have shown. So Joe Abercrombie has, I think, a masterful skill when it comes to you feeling like these are real people. Even the way it's in third person, but the way he writes the narrative for each of the different point of views, it feels different. It's third person point of view, but it almost feels like first person because you feel that it's that character telling the story, even though it is the narrator. A great deal of the characters in the story, whether they have point of views or not, are extremely morally gray, and it's a lot of bleakness that we're faced with throughout the story. So it's not this hunky-dory good guys are going to save the day, which I'm not trying to put down that, because I think that that is fun as well. But if you're the kind of person who is looking for a story with really good, very well developed characters that are realistic in a lot of ways, sometimes they border a little bit on being extra gray. But if you're looking for a story that has those kinds of characters, that they feel real, you're not necessarily looking for somebody who inspires you, you're looking for somebody who maybe you can feel a little bit better than, that's what these are. There's so many moments throughout the series where these characters seem like they are developing and they're becoming better, and something happens and you're thinking, oh, okay, they're having this epiphany, they're gonna become a wonderful person now, and then something else will happen, you're like, oh, just kidding, I guess they're still awful. But despite this, it doesn't by any means to me ever feel like Joe Abercrombie was trying to throw really horrifying things at me just to shock me. And that's something that Grimdark, kind of from what I can tell, is something that puts a lot of people off. They're afraid that it's going to be too dark for them. They're afraid that there's just going to be one horrific thing after the other, and you're essentially following villains. And what's interesting about this story is that there are certain characters that you could categorize as villains, or at the very least, they're anti-heroes. But I don't personally get the impression that Joe Abercrombie was trying really hard to be like, look at how edgy all my characters are. He takes even a character who is a torturer, that's his job, he works for an inquisition. He takes that character and makes him basically the most likable character in the book, and somehow maybe you guys are better people than me, but from a fictional character stance, I constantly was like, but deep down inside, he's a good guy. I'm definitely getting hung up on the character aspects of the story, and that's just because I think that this story is so driven by these characters. I wanted to come back to these characters. I wanted to see what was going to happen to them, but that is what I would say not only the thing that makes this story shine, it's kind of the thing that carries this story, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just that there are so many other things that often we find that we like in books that this story, I don't think it highlights those things. So for example, the plot. It is fairly non-existent, and that's I don't mean that Joe Abercrombie wasn't planning at all. You definitely see things throughout the story that tie up and lead to things in the end. And so that's really cool. By the time you get to the end of the series, you see some foreshadowing that he clearly put in at the beginning, but it never felt like the plot was really at the forefront. The trilogy, it does something I found that I am not the biggest fan of, but for some people they might not care at all. And that is the way in which the fantastical elements, the things that generally you associate with the fantasy genre, the way those things were woven into the story, for me, they weren't woven into the story that much. It felt like a lot of times the magic we would get magical things when we would get magical things. They weren't really developed as much as I've come to like. Magic isn't even something a lot of people really believe in their world, and so when it does happen, it's clearly one of those, oh my gosh, what's going on? And so you don't expect the characters to really have this foundation of how the magic works. That's totally fine, but it did feel like sometimes it just popped up when it popped up, and I never felt like I knew the stakes because something could be happening, a battle could be transpiring, and I kind of was thinking, well, I think everything's gonna turn out fine because some magical thing will happen. Magic felt sometimes a little convenient. I think this also was a thing with the lore itself of the story and how the people who do have magic, they are so much a part of why our main characters are being pushed in certain directions. You find that things will happen, and then as a result, our characters have to react to those things. And when they are questioning, like, wait, what just happened? What's going on? You kind of get a whole backstory about, well, here's what happened years and years and years ago, centuries ago, between these magical people. And then you're just, as the reader, kind of left to be like, is that true? Or is that just what that person's saying? I guess it's true. I mentioned how the magic sometimes would a little bit limit my feelings as to how intense the stakes were in certain situations. On top of that, I feel like how we followed up on characters' injuries after action scenes, also a little bit as the story progressed, took away from my personal fear for the characters. Sometimes they would end up getting a really intense injury and it would barely cause them some trouble. There was one particular time when it was some of the best writing, one of the best moments in the series for me, when somebody got an injury and them recovering from that injury was done so incredibly well. And I was so captivated by that moment. And you're kind of in the character's head a lot throughout that. And they can't do anything because they're injured, as often is the case when you're injured. You can't really move about and be a productive member of society. So they're just kind of sitting thinking. And I eat that stuff up. I love those moments, especially in a fantastically done character-driven story when the characters just sit and reflect on things. I love it. It did, however, get brought down for me when sometimes those kinds of injuries that would happen, because there's a lot of fight scenes, somebody would have something really bad happen to them, and then I felt like they were up and about, no big deal, pretty quickly. And there was one where somebody, they literally got like stabbed in the face. And there's no mention of them having trouble eating or talking the next day. And that sounds horrific. I don't know if you guys have ever just like bitten your mouth before, or like you've eaten too much sour candy and your tongue hurts, but it's like all you can think about every time you want to talk or eat. And so for me, I'm like, did he just heal? What just happened? The last thing I want to touch on in the non-spoiler part would be the fact that these books are considered grimdark. I believe they are grimdark. I believe they're quite bleak at times. I believe they're gritty, very raw. And I find that for myself, I haven't really read a grimdark book that I've loved the way that I really enjoyed these ones. I think it shows what grimdark is capable of. It shows that things can be bleak and gritty and realistic without being over-the-top gratuitous violence. But I didn't end up thinking it was that dark. And I'm not going to go into in the non-spoiler portion why I think that, because it would be a spoiler. But maybe it would be helpful for you to know that while there's some moments that are kind of violent, I didn't think it was that dark. That said, I am going to jump into spoilers for the last book now. If you are interested in hearing my thoughts about the first two, I'll have the videos for those linked down below. But if you don't want spoilers, stop watching. Let's talk about my favorite thing about the ending. Glocta and Artie, I loved it. I loved it so much, the way that they got to be together in the end. And she so clearly was, maybe I shouldn't say so clearly because it's just how I viewed it. But I feel like the only reason that she was into Giselle is because she technically, deep down inside, probably always loved Glocta. She even said that she would see him and her brother practicing and how he was basically her dream man in a lot of ways. And I feel like that's the only reason why she was into Giselle, was because Giselle was like how Glocta used to be. So it was like she got to sort of kind of get this love that she actually wanted from Glocta, and then she gets to be with him, and she's gonna help take care of him, and he's gonna help take care of her. And none of this, I feel like the two of them, I don't know how to talk about how much I love them without sounding like I'm into a super creepy couple, but I'm just so happy that they were together. And that line where he's like, I don't deserve this, and she's like, most people don't get what they deserve. I was like, that's what he always says, but it's actually negative usually. So that was the thing that I loved, in case you couldn't tell. But I didn't like how a lot of things were solved in the end. The Logan Nine Fingers ending. Okay, Logan Nine Fingers. When I talk about how all these characters are really morally gray, and lots of people talk about these characters are so morally gray, except for I don't feel like Logan Nine Fingers is. Every instance of Logan as Logan, he's a big softie and he's a nice guy. I mean, I know he's really intense, but he also, I just feel like, is deep down this big sweetheart. Not even deep down, I feel like openly. In the second one especially, he's like trying to get them all to be friendly to some extent. He's trying to get to know that he's a nice person. The only time really that he does things that are super messed up is when he's suddenly the Bloody Nine. That's one of the things that I guess for some people, they'll probably like that it's left up in the air as to what the heck is happening. I know some people think that he is somewhat possessed by the spirits, and some people think he's just a berserk. I guess for me, I don't feel like he's that morally gray, and I don't feel like I'm supposed to question how good of a person he is, because every indication I've seen of when he is of a sound mind, he is a really good person. The only thing that makes him kind of bad is this potential possession thing that happens to him, and we don't really get answers to it. And I don't know. I just felt like then he's not really morally gray, and he's just a nice guy. I guess what was maybe fascinating for some people is because there's no explanation, how does he come to terms with it? But I don't know if we really spent enough time looking at it in that way. It didn't feel like he was contemplating, like, why do I do this? Why do I do this? Why am I like this? Why can't I fight this possession that takes me? It didn't feel like it was that very much. It just kind of felt like, that's just who I am, I guess. So his ending. I just found I never liked Black Dahlia from the second that he was making jokes about taking the one girl against her will in the second one. As soon as he did that, I was like, I hope you die, which he didn't. But in the end, I'm like, even if you have some other fellas with you, you saw him beat Fenris the Feared. That guy, like, puts his arm back on. So I'm like, okay, Logan Nine Fingers beat that guy and then pounded Bethod's head. You want to just fight that guy? They were all down to follow him until he took out Bethod, who they all were like, yeah, we agree, that guy sucks. He takes that guy out and they're like, I don't know if I like you anymore. It wasn't bad. It just didn't feel like it went about in a way that I loved. Along those same lines, I didn't really love how Pharaoh's story ended because we get her so late in the first one. So she already feels like, I feel that it was a little behind when it came to her story. And she didn't feel as much like a main character as the others. And that started to change a little bit in the second one. And I really liked how much we were kind of getting in her head in the second one. But we didn't see her a lot in the third one. And in the end, we didn't really get much at all with how her ending is. It's so open-ended that to me it feels like this is an opportunity to have a story that follows her later, which I guess was fine, but given how much of a significance she played in the battle for Adjua, is how I'm going to call it, that whole last part, she plays a huge role in it. She plays a huge role in Bias's plans in general, and her ending was just so open that I didn't love her ending. I didn't dislike Giselle's ending. I know I'm being a little bit of a brat about like, well, this didn't go the way I wanted, so but Giselle's ending was funny because I found that the way in which his storyline went about was such a 180. He's a character that is so obnoxious, and if you tell me how his life turns out by the end, and I didn't see the journey, I would think, oh, well, that's kind of what he deserves. But because you see the journey and you see the effort he's made to change, and then by the end, his life is just what it is now, you feel bad for him. Even though initially when I sit back and think about it, I'm like, you weren't a good person. You were really selfish. You never did anything for anyone else. You only ever thought about yourself. And then by the end, he's trying to make an effort to think about other people. And even though he's the king, he really doesn't have any power to do anything. And Bias doesn't really want the kind of government that he thinks would be best, the way that Giselle thinks would be best for the people. So I liked seeing that. And I loved that last part. And I'm such a whiner. But I loved and didn't like how the last part with Giselle and Glocta happened. So one thing, this is a little bit of a tangent, that I didn't love was, did they have to be so brutal towards his wife's lover? The whole, oh, well, if you don't satisfy your husband constantly in a need to produce heirs, then we'll just, we'll have things done to your lover. I was like, I get the threat. I know that we go places with Glocta that are pretty dark. I'm aware of that. But what if the queen has infertility? Like, what if she has trouble conceiving or something? Like, if she doesn't produce an heir in that amount of time, you're just gonna keep that girl down there indefinitely? It just, to me, it felt a little over the top to be like, even though Glocta, I know you love him and I know you're happy for him, but let me remind you that he's really awful. That was the only time in the series that I was like, this feels a little much. Anyway, that tangent aside, getting into the thing that I loved and didn't like about the last part. Anytime Glocta interacted with pretty much anybody, whether it was Giselle, Logan, West, Artie, I loved every interaction. The last part with them, where he and Giselle are talking about the fact that basically you gotta do whatever Glocta says because that's what Bias says. So he has these plans. Giselle's talking to him and he's like, this is what I would like to do. And he's like, I don't think our mutual friend wants that. And he's like, oh yes, okay, well tell our mutual friend that I can do whatever he says. And they're like, yeah, okay. And then Glocta kind of is like, but he can't see everything. I loved that. And this camaraderie, this little glimpse of camaraderie between the two of them, this glimpse of them not just doing everything Bias wants. You're like, yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Except for then that's followed up by the chapter called Loose Ends. And it was like, hey, remember that guy Pike? Turns out that was Salem Ruse from the beginning. Remember that really attractive lady from Dagoska? Well, here's what's going to happen with her. And it was all fine. None of that was bad. But I would have loved those swapped. I wanted that part with Giselle and Glocta, even though we have this bleak ending where basically this tyrant is getting his way. Even though we are seeing that, I loved getting this spark of, oh, but wait, it's not necessarily just going to be that. That was such a perfect ending for me. So when we had this loose ends thing happen, I just wish that had happened before. We got the Logan part. I wish that had happened before, or just I wish that hadn't happened at all, to be honest. But that last part, it was so perfect. It was so perfect as the ending. And then when it wasn't the ending, I know that's so stupid, but I really wish that had been the ending, because then I would have finished it and would have been like, that was good. That was good. And instead we get the loose ends and Logan, and the Logan thing, I was like, gosh darn it. The last thing that I'll say in the spoiler portion, I mentioned how this story didn't feel as grimdark to me as I was expecting. And that's because, okay, nobody has to die in order for me to be like, it was so realistic because, you know, people die and people died in this book, so it's realistic. I don't need people to die. But I never worried about our characters at the end. I didn't worry at all about them, which is, I think, part of the frustrating thing about the Logan chapter at the end, because I'm going to get into a different thing with Logan. It just got to the point where I didn't fear for them whatsoever. One, because like I said in the non-spoiler portion, the magic just kind of would save them sometimes. I also found that Logan literally got stabbed to the face, and no big deal, I guess. Gisele's injury from the second book, I don't feel like they ever talked about, oh, it's like difficult for him to eat now because of the fact that his jaw is different, or like they didn't. Every now and then they'd be like, Giselle looks very different, perhaps more manly and regal. He has a scar on his face, but he's still very pretty. And it just didn't feel like it was that big of an injury. In the second one, I believe at one point he says, a month ago, I would have looked at these people like whatever negative thing he thought about Pharaoh and Logan and stuff. And then he's like, but now everything's changed. And I'm like, in a month? Are you better now? The magic would kind of happen at times. The injuries didn't really feel like they mattered that much. But the part that really, this is the thing. So, what's his name? Crummick, the hill man, the big hill man with the kids, which that was hilarious. But that guy should have killed Logan. I don't want to say looking forward to that guy killing Logan, but that guy just pops up in the third book, kind of randomly. I liked the guy, didn't mind there's new characters being introduced, no big deal. When that guy showed up in the room, after he defeated Fenris, after he killed Bethod, and now Logan's tired, there's no way he can fight, and that guy comes in and he hugs him. I'm like, he's gonna kill him. Oh my gosh, he's gonna kill him. Ugh. And in the second book, I was like, if Logan dies, I'm gonna be so sad because I love Logan. And we get to this third one, and this is happening. I'm like, he's gonna kill him. Oh my gosh, he's gonna kill him, which I guess I'm like really bloodthirsty. I was like, oh, that's gonna suck after everything that Logan does. Man, this is gonna suck. But at the same time, I'm like, this is gonna be great because it would be so fitting with this story, with the bleakness and the way the smallest things can kill people. So when he just is like, just don't show up in my neck of the woods. Ha ha ha, I've got other sons. And then Logan's like, you're crazy. And I was like, that was ridiculous. No, that should have been resolved. I didn't like that. And so that happens obviously before the battle for Adua. And so the Battle of Adua, I was just like, I mean, there's no consequences anymore, it feels like, for anything, which makes me sound a little bit hypocritical after what I was saying about the ending with Logan. The ending with Logan, I just didn't feel like, I don't know, I just didn't like the whole ending. But that whole last chunk lost a lot for me because the only people that really ate it in the story were really minor side characters. And I just didn't fear for my heroes in the end. Weirdly, because of all that, that's what I mean when I say it didn't feel that grimdark in the end, because I just didn't think I think things worked out pretty well for the most part for most of our characters, except for Pharaoh hearing voices now, but I don't know what's even going on with that, so that's the only. And Logan is just like, look at this interesting open ending for Logan Ninefingers. So I guess those are sort of bleak, but I felt like everything was... Wes died. So, okay, everything wasn't okay. Wes died from, like, this magical backlash to Biaz's seed power. Overall, I found that it just was kind of sort of a happier ending than I was anticipating. That's not a bad thing. Just wasn't what I was anticipating. All in all, really enjoyed this series in a lot of ways. It didn't wrap up the way I was hoping, and that's okay, but it's a good thing. I find that I guess you could call it a complaint. Yeah, that's definitely what's happening. I was definitely complaining. Let's call it that. My complaints are pretty much, for the most part, rooted in things not transpiring the way I wanted them to transpire. That's a good thing, I think, because it has nothing to do with his ability to write well. It's just me wanting things differently. So I'm excited to read more Abercrombie. I know everybody says that the short stories that come after this are even better. I'm really excited to read his young adult series. I'm excited for more Abercrombie. Definitely an author who stands out in my mind because I always eat up the character work stuff. It's my favorite thing about books. That's what he's a master at, and I'm excited to see more of it. If you're still here, let me know your thoughts. I've been rambling for so long now, so let me know your thoughts on this trilogy as a whole. Do you completely disagree and you feel like, no, it was so bleak, it was the best ending ever because it was so bleak or something? Let me know your thoughts. I'm excited to see it. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.